Welcome to Conversations with ARI, and it's a sort of informal conversation on various papers that have been written on Afghanistan. Dr. Rafi is our non-resident fellow and have been collaborating with ARI, let's say, for the last several years.
Okay.
So this is great to have you with us, and it's a very interesting topic. I think it's unexplored concept, Ograyi. I don't think anybody has written or I haven't seen a lot of peer-reviewed papers on this topic. So it's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Dr.
Okay.
Lutfi.
So great. So if I understood correctly, essentially, you're in the paper, you're saying that I'm going to hand over to you to explain what Ograyi is,
Mm.
because even as a term for me, it's very unfamiliar, as in where does it come from as a word and as um, a terminology that is used, and what it means literally and what it means in the context of uh, manufacturing or exchange-based and other economic activities. So
Mm.
essentially, what you're saying in the paper is that this is not a financial instrument, it's a relationship-based exchange system. And it operates through a very different mechanism than contract, which is what we're used to
Sure.
in the formal Western sense of the word. So uh, it's a misunderstanding to call this as a credit. Essentially, that's what you're arguing. So, as a first point, what is it? And if you
Mhm.
can explain the concept to us, and then tell us why you chose this topic, why you wanted to explore this.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Lutfi. Well, it's a privilege to be here and talk to you. And well, first of all, what is Ograyi? Um, Ograyi is as you mentioned, it has been an under-researched topic when it comes to Afghanistan's economy. And why it has missed researchers' attention. It's another debate. There hasn't been, so far as I know, given my many years of research on Afghanistan, shows that not much attention has been given to the economy proper. There has been a lot of attention given to topics related to the international coalition in Afghanistan, and obviously there is a stream of financing that justifies what kind of topics should be picked for investigation. So mostly in research on Afghanistan's economy, illicit trade has grabbed a lot of attention because there has been funding to investigate narcotics trade, etc., etc. Corruption, aid economy has attracted a lot of attention, but not much the economy proper. So Afghanistan's economy as it is, not for an outside audience, but for a positive, so to speak, empirical investigation of the economy, how it operates, what is the tax system, what is the credit system, and so on and so forth. Um, Part of that is also because there economics or economic development research is not too common in that context. So a lot of work has been done by anthropologists, by political scientists, but economic research, mainly having to do also with the kind of topics we are introduced in mainstream economics, then going to Afghanistan, the field is quite different. It's vastly alien to the kind of topics that we tend to study in a normal economics course. that is why the empirical field also seems quite strange. So doing empirical work in that kind of an environment requires a lot of open mind, so to speak. I come from an economics background, economic development background. So I thought, not to go too far from the topic, I was focused on manufacturing activities from for my research, for my PhD research, and then I bumped into this concept more and more. I had heard about the concept living in Afghanistan, Ograyi, but I didn't know how it operated. What was the importance of it? Ograyi essentially, and I will get back to why I studied production after explaining what Ograyi is. It's mainly a sociological category. So in the sense that to distinguish it from an economic category, economic in the narrow sense, it's basically the name given to a relationship that is established for exchange purposes. So a person A exchanges goods with person B. That relationship that they forge in the market, in the exchange market, especially, well, but it's exclusively exchange market, I claim. It's called Ograyi, and there is a social aspect to that. Obviously, the explicit purpose of that is the exchange itself, but in order to exchange goods, you need to go and meet the person and form a recognition, shanacht. That is absolutely essential when it comes to especially production sectors, which are at risk, and they require a lot of face-to-face interaction in order to garner, in order to secure trust in the buyer. And what this recognition does is that it underwrites this relationship of exchange. Goods are handed over by the producer. So I'm introducing this new concept now here in this discussion, producer, because I've focused on producers, mainly those who are engaged or who have invested in manufacturing activities. So a producer hands over goods to a person, a buyer or a retailer or a wholesaler, and they're not paid upfront. It's basically that transaction is entirely based on that face-to-face recognition that is established. And the contextually relevant understanding of trust and that kind of an exchange is called e'tibar, which is a particular form of trust. I know the word trust is thrown around quite freely when it comes to similar debates, but e'tibar is contingent in the sense that it is based on face-to-face evidence, face-to-face evidence gathering, especially in its early stages. You need to go and meet the person in person, physically. And it can be eroded if the person does not abide by certain standards. It's different from blind trust, for instance, that we have without evidence. So we trust. So it's written on the face of a dollar note. If you have seen, we trust in God, but nobody has seen God. But there is this blind trust in this entity, or we trust our siblings, we trust our parents, we trust our friends, etc. And those kind of broad abstract trust does not necessarily require evidence, but e'tibar is quite contingent. It requires trust building, and it requires evidence to come about. So Ograyi is that relationship of e'tibar or trust, contingent trust, and that is formed in the market, in the exchange market. It's mainly the conversion of economic capital into social capital. Now there's another category that I'm introducing here. It's a Bourdieusian, it's a term that I've used from this French political economist, philosopher, sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu. Social capital, and in his terminology, it is the benefits or the advantages we reap from membership in groups. So whenever we are part of a group that endows us with benefits. Uh, so Ograyi, in a sense, is the conversion of economic capital, financial capital, by a producer into social capital, into that the process of building that a network of retailers whom one knows and one can trust and hand over their goods without requiring, and here is the interesting part, without requiring the retailer to pay upfront. So that is the thing. You hand over. So imagine doing business in Afghanistan, having to deal with a lot of circumstantial difficulties and challenges. And on top of that, you would need to hand over your goods, your produced goods, without asking for upfront payment, purely based on e'tibar. And in order to enter the market in Kabul, in Afghanistan, you would need to depend on Ograyi. More and more, my research participants said that without offering on Ograyi, it's literally impossible to break into the market because retailers don't have adequate cash with them to pay upfront, or wholesalers don't have cash to pay upfront. So in a sense, the producer has a part of their assets, a part of their circulating capital, trapped into the stock of goods that they hand over to the retailers or wholesalers. So in a way, the system operates in an exact opposite of how credit should work, right? Credit provides circulating capital for producers when in need, whereas Ograyi operates in the exact opposite. It diminishes the available or the disposable circulating capital with producers, right? So I know I've covered a lot of things. We can discuss them more in detail. So yeah, in a nutshell, Ograyi is the conversion of economic into social capital based on e'tibar to break into the exchange market in Afghanistan.
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot to unpick.
Mm-hmm.
One question to begin with is where does the term come from? Is it a Persian word? It's a Pashto word? What does it mean? Did you ever find out?
So based on my interviews, the field work, more and more there was the sense that the word has traveled from Pakistan, from the border regions.
Okay.
And there was explicit mentions of this as well, that this habit has come from Pakistan, but now it is a cultural habit here. Uh, Multiple participants said that this is the way things are done here, or
Mhm.
whatever is sold in Afghanistan is sold on Ograyi. There was one, um, sorry to cut you off, interviewee, participant, and most of my participants, or all of them, were investors in manufacturing activities. So they were investors, they were owners of manufacturing units. He was a returnee from Iran, and when I said, so this was late into my field work, and I had already gotten familiar with Ograyi, and I wanted to do more work on that as well, on top of my main work on manufacturing activities. When I mentioned Ograyi, he was a bit said, "Well, I have no clue what you're talking about. What is Ograyi?"
Interesting.
And that's where, because he had grown up in Iran, and that's where I understood that the term had uh, a resonance for those who had come from Pakistan or who had dealings with the Pakistani market. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. So what you've done, I think, is explain to us conceptually what Ograyi is and how different it is from the traditional conventional credit market or systems that we know. Um, I wanted to ask one question within that space, and then the main question I want to ask is if you give an example of how practically it works. For example,
Hmm.
If there is a manufacturing firm based in Kabul that produces soap or I don't know, some other product,
Sure.
and there is a bunch of wholesalers they deal with or a bunch of shops on the high street that they deal with, and then how does Ograyi operate through this chain? So the first part is essentially on the conceptual bit, the question I had was, you mentioned a number of times that it's a face-to-face recognition, so you need to know the person face-to-face. Are there
Mhm.
other elements, presumably, like a friend of a friend or somebody vouches for you or
Mhm.
introduces you? There's a whole lot that
Sure.
goes in the background before you actually get to the doorsteps of the manufacturer and say, okay, so you know who I am. So part of that
Mhm.
face-to-face interaction, there's a whole bunch of other information that they gather before trusting or before that ATA that comes about.
Yes, so in terms of um, recognition, so the underwriting element is ATABOR. If you have ATABOR on someone else and they vouch for, say, retailer XYZ, and then that ATABOR is extended to that person as well, right? It's a network economy. Basically, I come and vouch for Ahmad or Mahmoud, and then you, being the producer, would trust Ahmad and Mahmoud based on me extending my itibar, putting my, so to speak, itibar on the line. And there's also this important attribute of itibar. It's attached to the object of itibar. It's not like you as a producer has trust is something that is subjective. So I have trust on something A, B, C, or I don't know the the things that I trust in. It's a subjective experience I have regarding them. But Etibar is attached to the trust can also have this attribute, but Etibar is exclusively attached to the object of Etibar. So, for instance, my Etibar in your eyes is entirely based on how I behave. Right? So it is something, an
Okay.
attribute that's attached to me. So when I come and vouch for someone else, I'm putting that currency on the line. Sort of, I'm putting my credibility and on the line, and I'm sort of putting a stake from on my behalf to establish this relationship between you as the producer and someone else. So yeah, the common denominator is eta bar, right? And whether that is established by face-to-face interaction between the producer and the retailer, or someone else vouches for it, um, is secondary. So the main attribute, the main element, the main factor is eta bar. To go back to your example of a soap producer, so to give a practical example how it works,
Like an
you as
operationally, right? So at an
yeah.
operational level, basically, how does Ograyi work before we move on to the next part?
So I'm an investor. I establish a manufacturing unit, and then I want to sell this to someone in Kabul. What I will do is I will go to the retail market in Kabul. I will also contact other friends who have been dealing in the same sector, for instance. What I will do is physically go to Mandawi, which is the largest goods market in Kabul, and talk to retailers in person. I'll tell them, hey, this is a batch of my products. Take it, put it in your shop. You don't need to pay me upfront. I have full trust in our dealings. I know where your shop is located, etc., etc. Or it's the other way around. The retailer comes to the producer because the producer is the initial stage of building or breaking into the market. It normally happens by the producer approaching the retailers because a retailer has the advantaged position, the, how should I say, uh, the preferred position in this market because they interact face to face with end consumers. They are the ones who decide who gets to sell what and the goods market. The producer approaches retailers, hands over merchandise on credit. So, for instance, say I handed over 5,000 worth of goods, Afghani, of soap to a retailer, retailer A, retailer B, retailer C. Combined, say I invested 50,000 or 100,000 Afghanis in Ograyi. So basically, I go and I hand over stocks of goods, produced goods, um, to all these retailers. And then the next week, I go and I collect this is what it's called, the outcomes of Ograyi. So I go to retailer A, retailer B, retailer C, retailer E, etc. Um, with a new batch of supplies. Normally, the new batch of supply comes when there is a frequency or the relationship has been established for many months or many years, and there is an expectation by the retailer that when you show up, you already have a new batch of supplies. But if it's a newly established relationship, you go there and you bring a supply and you ask for installments. So how much was sold last week? The retailer would say, well, the market was good or bad, etc. There is a commitment that is formed. It also depends on the kind of products that is being sold and the place the producer tends to have in the market. If they sell an exclusive product and they are the only supplier in the market, then retailers would go and approach them, and the relationship sort of is built the other way around. The retailer tends to negotiate and say, I'm a trustworthy person, etc. This is my shop, this is my address, and these are my dealings, etc., etc. And this is how it works. So there's always this relationship that keeps the retailer tied to the producer. It's a constant relationship of supplies and installment payment.
Yeah, I think maybe it's about time we move into production and why you
Sure.
reckon production wasn't being taken seriously in the last, let's say, 2 decades. So you've focused on production, I think, as part of this paper as well.
So the reason why the reason why I focused on production was, and I applied an institutionalist perspective on production in Afghanistan was, well, why production first? Production had been neglected in many works that had been done on Afghanistan. As I mentioned, there were many works that had taken a anthropological lens, many works that came from international relations and political science angle and studied Afghanistan, especially after 2001. And there were many works of hard science, so on water systems, on irrigation, on agriculture, etc., etc., on soil composition, weather patterns, but on economy as a topic of, especially on manufacturing activities, there wasn't much in-depth study conducted. International organizations and consultancies had done work, but this was basically a macro level assessment. Especially the IMF would publish, say, a one paragraph statement regarding, or a short sentence even, based on quantitative information provided by the Afghan government about manufacturing. So manufacturing grew 1% during the season, etc., etc. There hadn't been a proper investigation done on why people would invest in manufacturing. And when manufacturing activities are quite important for an economy like Afghanistan, because predominantly the economy is reliant on primary sector. So agriculture is quite dominant. And for an economy such as Afghanistan, the way forward would be to complexify its economy. So create an economic allocative regime where one sector does not dominate. You have manufacturing that then builds on what agriculture produces and creates or adds value to to agricultural goods, etc., etc., and then you move on to tertiary sector. But at this stage, manufacturing made sense, and um, my point of interest was also to examine the market economy in Afghanistan. So, how does market economy operate within the context of a country like Afghanistan? You have a conflict that continues. So, from 2002 already, there was an anti-government insurgency, which kept intensifying. But nonetheless, you had this in the economic policy side of things, you had a market economy that was the main framework. So to examine what the market economy is, is to simplify things, is suitable for such a context. I examined it through the empirical lens of manufacturing activities. So if there was evidence that the economy had grown more complex, manufacturing activity being the one major indicator of that, then market economy is suitable for such a context. Otherwise, there would be need for alternative ways of approaching the economy in similar contexts. Um, Obviously, my main interest was economic development in the larger sense and making life better for everyone, etc., etc. So, bringing those two preoccupations together, manufacturing activities as a sign of progress within market economy. I went and I did my field work in Afghanistan. It turned out that there had been a lot of investments that had taken place by the private sector in this in manufacturing activities. Um, which had been prior to 2001 mainly managed by the state. So the few large manufacturing units and operations were owned and operated by the state prior to the 1978 to 2001 wars. And when after the 2001 reforms, most of those were either liquidated or they were earning uh, by renting out their property. They had stopped operating. And to me, also, it was a matter of curiosity to know why people had invested in manufacturing in a situation as dire and as challenging as Afghanistan. Many things are lacking. The local knowledge about the sector is literally absent. And you need to also have a lot of sunk capital commitments because you're not dealing with a sector that is highly liquid, such as trade. You don't have a commitment to the geography of place when you're dealing with a liquid sector or liquid business. So all these different points of interest led to me doing fieldwork on manufacturing activities.
Okay. I mean, we could. I'm very tempted to ask about, all these usual questions that you get when you study Afghanistan post 2001. The state versus private sector investment and each of their respective roles and so on. But I'm going to resist the temptation. So let's stick to Ograyi.
Sure.
One other thing that came to mind while you were speaking, you mentioned something about this being the opposite of a credit system where part of your stock or capital as a manufacturer is stuck with the retailer.
Sure.
And essentially, is that raises a question about its scalability. Do you reckon this system or this exchange-based system is it scalable, or is it does it have a constraint, where part of your circulating capital gets locked up with the retailer, so you're always in this circular liquidity constraint? I don't know if that is true. Um, is Ograyi scalable?
Can I ask what? Would you mean scalable in the sense of can a single person continue selling based on this?
So essentially, if you were to create a national level, so for example, you're a manufacturer and you are
Mhm.
manufacturing in Kabul, and now you want to scale up to, let's say, 5 different zones in Afghanistan. And would there reach a point where it gets to a place where you cannot use Ograyi as a system, as a way to
Uh,
reach to more retailers? And also, is there a reverse effect where, using the Ograyi-based system, essentially what you're doing
mhm.
is you're not accessing more capital. You're in this circular kind of liquidity constraint. I don't know if you encountered any of essentially the limitations of this system, because the question would be that the broader question, what I'm asking or what I'm getting to is this versus a conventional credit system, right? So
Mhm.
would there be a point where manufacturers would feel the need to move to a fully fledged, banking credit system?
So here I wish to point out that there is absolutely no link between Ograyi and credit. That point needs to be emphasized more and more because credit is a specific economic concept and it has a specific economic connotation. Even if I give you my cell phone and you say, "Could you borrow me your cell phone?" That colloquial connotation of borrowing does not entail interest. And so far as there is not a contract signed between me and you that entails interest by me lending you my cell phone, that shouldn't be called credit in the economic sense because then it creates a lot of confusion. And credit is a phenomenon that has emerged during a particular phase of capitalist development in history. And Afghanistan as a market, it's more or less it's devoid of credit in the sense of being largely available to producers, to investors. And that has social reasons because credit, and this was also in other societies as well, interest is considered usury, and it's strictly looked down upon if someone engages in usury. Usury is it has been chastised in the Quran many times, and people who engage in usury they're called sudkhoren in Kabul's market. It's a really bad reputation to have. So if someone is known as a sudkhor, then they may just as well close down their shop because they lose their etibar. Etibar is something that is really essential in Kabul's market. So there is absolutely no link between credit and um, that confusion should be removed entirely. So the reason to go back to your question whether there is a possibility to scale up operations using based on the system. Sure, there is a possibility to do that, but then the producer would need to secure some source of capital injection. I don't know, tapping into their personal resources, asking friends, um, uh, considering that there are no capital markets, then there has to be some personal source for capital injection, for new capital injection, in addition to what the investor has already invested in their operations. And obviously earnings that come from installments. So there is this swapping process that the investor uses the money from installments gathered today to produce for retailers who will be supplied tomorrow. Similarly, there is the cycle of capital gathered or monetary capital collected through installments that are basically recycled and uh,
Reinvested.
reinvested. You could, yes, you could do that, but at the same time, the more you expand your share in the market, the more you have money spread in the market in this way, um, the more difficult it is to go collect installments, because that is a procedure as well. So there's no, um, could be that a retailer uses a bank account, but then it may it may entirely be physical. So a person, a producer, or their representative would need to go to all the shops, especially as supplies are constantly made. So uh, the retailer receives a supply and then pays installment. So it's a highly time-consuming procedure to go and collect installments. But the larger the market share, the larger the investment would be in time and resources to go collect installments. And in case the producer stops producing by some accident, the larger the market share, the more difficult it would be to retrieve the capital that has already been spread out in the market and on Ograyi. So yeah, there is that contradiction built into the system.
Exactly this point. I think what you said about the contrast between a credit system and Ograyi is, I think, crucial. We need to bear that in mind that this is not a credit system in the conventional sense that we understand. As you were talking, I kept remembering buy now, pay later scheme,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of kicked in about 2 years ago in the UK. I don't know if a similar scheme exists in France or not. But I think in the US and the UK, this came in about 2, 3 years ago. And if we remove the interest, I mean, most of them are interest free as well, by the way. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, if you buy a phone from Apple, you can buy now and then pay later, but I don't know how they check the, how they guarantee. Probably they have your address and bank address and your home address, etc., and credit history. But it seems like we are moving a little bit towards that
Mm-hmm.
social capital system as well. Um, so that distinction is there, and I think that should be noted. And the point about the scalability, I think that's exactly what I was trying to get at. Essentially, back in 2018, I remember, or maybe 19, I can't remember which year this was. I remember having a very extensive conversation about Ograyi in the Ministry of Economy of Afghanistan. And one of the arguments, I think, or one of the arguments I was making there was that we should introduce banking system to reduce this physical constraint. So essentially,
Mm-hmm.
what I was saying that maybe all these installments that retailers and high street shops and all these local vendors they repay, it's physically impossible if you expand out to 3 provinces. It's physically
Sure.
impossible to collect all of this. So essentially, what you could do is you could introduce a banking payment system where all these people would pay the installments on a weekly basis or monthly basis into the manufacturer's bank account. But then I guess the question also it doesn't remove all of that physical constraint. What if the person doesn't pay? Because part of that special form of trust that you were speaking about, Bar, is also actually seeing the person. So I think when
Mm-hmm.
you show up on a Thursday, the person sees you. There is this impact that it has. That if you remove that physical presence, maybe it won't have the same impact. Um, the other question occurred to me while you were speaking is a rival to manufacturing sector in Afghanistan, which is imported goods that also goes to these retailers within Kabul Central Market or Mandai, and they used a similar system. So I
Yep.
had a friend who did who imported textile from China, I think, and his entire operation in Kabul was based on Ograyi. So essentially, he was a wholesaler that got everything in the central market, and then he had, I don't know, 50 clients, small high street shops from all around Kabul who would come take it from him, and then I think he had a guy who went around every Thursday and collected whatever amount of money they could collect. Maybe there was some sort of flexible pre-arrangement between them where they would pay a certain amount if they had sold X number of units.
Okay.
Um, were you able to interact with that rival part of this market? And how does that affect manufacturing in Afghanistan or in Kabul?
Well, many of the people who have manufacturing units in Kabul have been traders before. So manufacturing activities are mainly um, in Kabul, how I witnessed. Um, Apart from some highly technical, well, I would say even the most sophisticated um, industries that I investigated, the pharmaceuticals, the complex intermediary goods were already produced elsewhere. So in a sense, those who dealt with production were traders at some point. They imported these goods. And then at some point in 2001 or after, there was this realization that perhaps the last stages, or probably the second last and last stages, could be produced, could be finished in Afghanistan rather than importing the finished goods from elsewhere. So um, when I spoke to these producers, they were talking about the exchange market in general. There was not this distinction between them as producers and someone else as an importer. Um, uh, uh, Whether an import business would pose a challenge to the producer using Ograyi was not my point of investigation. So I didn't do a research on what was that impact. Um, but obviously, um, when we were talking about Ograyi, it was in a general sense. And Ograyi can also work as an instrument for competition. So if an importer has a lot of money in the bank account or in the coffers, they offer retailers with a generous Ograyi. So they say, take this next week. I don't know, pay me 5%, or I'll come. Not urgent to pay me. It's just keep it in your shop. If you sell my merchandise, then you pay me. Otherwise, there's no rush. So in that sense, if there is a large producer or importer, they could outcompete another producer or importer who shows up and says, well, I need my money urgently. If you can sell this, I will come next week. Could you at least pay 50% of uh, the value, the exchange value, right? So in that sense, producers and importers, regardless of what sector they represent, can outcompete other uh, market actors by using Ograyi in a more favorable way. Going to the UK example of people paying now and no, buying now and paying later, I think we are there is also there's this the risk of jumping between different societies. So in UK, if you're not, imagine if you engage in such a trade with a retailer, uh, there's a host of institutions, laws and regulations, people's habits, etc., that comes in to support that exchange.
Yeah.
If that person does not meet the promise of paying later, then they get into a whole lot of mess. That element of etibar that I mentioned, the social capital, is entirely absent here. You're dealing with someone, the implicit understanding is that you must pay. Otherwise, you will be basically seen as a felon in front of before the law, and your whole life is basically jeopardized. In Afghanistan, you don't have that implicit understanding. That e'tibar underwrites that there is no legal retribution. If as a retailer I don't meet, if I close down my shop and I go and relocate to another province, there's no way of tracking me. Even if I change places in the same market, go from one place to the other, or just simply say, sorry, I'm not paying. There is no way of, I think that cultural understanding of legal retribution that we have in say in UK does not exist. That is why it makes Ograyi such a particular case to investigate. That a whole exchange market operates based only on face-to-face recognition.
Okay. So I have two more questions, and we have about 10 to 9 minutes. So you decide which one you want to answer first. First question is, what was the attitude, or if you ever came across of the attitude of policymakers towards this? Was there an understanding of it? Was there any discussion about it within the policymaking circles? That this could be, like you said, this is a tool for competition, and actually competition works through this tool. So there's a lot of potential, how, and also, how you can remove some of little constraints and tweak the system a little bit to make it much more efficient, I guess, or more scalable, and remove some of those little things by small tweaks. What was the attitude of the policymakers? And the second question is, do tell us about the complications of doing research in COBOL. I think this is a theme that has come up in various formats. I was, in fact, invited to do a talk about this myself at some point, but that never happened. So this is an area maybe we can talk about more in a separate event as well. But you choose one of the two questions. What were the complications of doing research? How were you able to do that? And what is it like right now? So if people want to do research post 2021, if you have any experience or comments on that.
So I will briefly touch on both the questions. In terms of policymakers, they were not part of my field work, so I didn't go and talk to, except for a few cases. I spoke with one person in the Economic Council, the High Economic Council and the Presidential Palace, just to get a feel of whether there has been a shift in policy towards manufacturing activities. And the person said, no, he was basically totally blind about any kind of support system to manufacturing. They said, yes, there is a person who represents producers in our meetings, but it goes so far as that. And there was a shift in procurement policy that was meant to give a preference to local producers, to domestic producers. That was enacted sometime in 2015, 2016 during Ashraf Ghani's government. But that would require, for a single project, many different types of products, and producers would usually lose in that kind of bidding process because they usually produce one product, one item. They're not a sort of a huge international corporation who have been delivering the same type of projects, and they can guarantee that they can deliver all the different items, different products that are required to deliver that project. So in that sense, I didn't interact with policymakers, and I knew that there was this, and producers, participants themselves were also repeatedly, they mentioned that we don't engage with the government because we know that at the policy level, the government itself requires help. What help can it provide us? So the thinking had already been framed within the government agencies that the market should deal with with itself. We are sort of a non-interfering custodians of the market economy. That was the main insistence by the World Bank and the IMF from the beginning, from the get-go. And that kind of a government wasn't prepared to deal with manufacturing activities and the challenges, including Ograyi. There were attempts to increase financial accessibility. So introduce sukuk, which is a form of Sharia compliant credit. There were multiple studies done during the 2010s. And then in 2019, there was another attempt, a last ditch attempt by the government to introduce sukuk. But I didn't come across a law that codified sukuk and before the collapse of the republic. In terms of the difficulties of, so I have 4 minutes to summarize. Difficulties of doing research in Kabul. That's another thing that might have impeded doing work on manufacturing activities. Field work in Afghanistan is highly complicated. So the word research itself is in many ways, one needs to qualify what kind of research it is. So whenever I call someone, I would say it's a scientific research, because the word tahqiq is a relatively more comprehensive term. Tahqiq can also mean legal prosecution, tahqiq qazai. So you would need to clarify that I'm not here to investigate or audit your company. And many companies are quite apprehensive of the fact that government informants might come and they might, or rival companies might send informants, or a foreign country like Iran or Pakistan might send informants, which had happened apparently based on some participant accounts, to know what are the business secrets inside that company, inside that manufacturing unit, what is the earnings of that company, and then harm them in some way. So they were already apprehensive of even a purely scientific research. But then
Interesting.
simply coming there and knocking a door and saying, well, I'm a researcher and I want to investigate your unit, it seems like someone might laugh at you. It doesn't happen that easily. There has to be a lot of, the first unit I researched was owned by a friend of a friend who basically vouched for me. And then I went and started my field work. And eventually I managed to investigate more than 50 manufacturing units, which was of different sizes. And that required a lot of haggling. It required a lot of back-to-back calling, a lot of coordination, a lot of, I had plenty of gray hair growing on me. And after that field work, then many canceled. You go through the entire haggling of setting up a field visit or to a company. You go to that company and the person basically says, well, I'm sorry, but I'm not willing to cooperate. And I had many of those happening. And it would take at least a week of coordination to set up one of these visits, calling, reminders, etc. Geographic hurdles are in place. Securities all of a sudden falls apart. There is a suicide attack somewhere in the city. The entire city basically becomes turns into a chaotic mess. Many things are unforeseeable when it comes to doing research fieldwork in Kabul, which is the best of the possible scenarios in Afghanistan. Imagine doing work in some other province where resources are less favorable for research. So yeah, it requires a lot of effort to do fieldwork in Afghanistan, and obviously I'd be happy to go through them in more detail some other time.
Yeah, and patience, presumably, and patience.
A lot of patience.
Okay. So I think we are on the mark. So thank you very much. It was a very interesting conversation and also a very interesting topic. When we started, I hadn't realized the extent of how different Ograyi should be considered compared to credit system, because there is so much focus on the credit system and how this is the savior, in terms of doing business. So it's actually refreshing to hear about all these different systems that have been somewhat ignored, essentially. Um, okay, so if you have any last points, the mic is yours. Otherwise, thank you very much, and hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you, Dr. Lutfi, for the opportunity, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.